Welcome to Poirot Stories. I'm your host, Preston Flint. Tonight we step into the fog-draped streets of 1920s London, where shadows conceal secrets and the brilliant Hercule Poirot prepares to unravel a mystery that chills the heart. Settle in with a warm drink, dear listeners, and let the slow, deliberate unfolding of this tale draw you into the enigma of Rue de Lune. Tell me in the comments where you're listening from, and let us begin. Chapter 1. Introduction and Setup. The autumn fog hung heavy over Rue de Lune, a narrow, forgotten street in 1920s London where the past seemed to linger in the cobblestones. Gas lamps cast feeble pools of light, their glow swallowed by the mist that curled like a living thing around the grand townhouses. Number 17 stood apart, its Georgian facade imposing yet secretive, its tall windows veiled by heavy velvet curtains. This was the residence of Dr. Archibald Vane, a neurologist whose reputation for unlocking the mysteries of the human mind was matched only by whispers of his ruthless ambition. Tonight the house was alive with the promise of intrigue, for Hercule Poirot, the celebrated Belgian detective, had been summoned. Poirot, with his immaculate mustache and polished patent leather shoes, stepped from a handsome cab, his green eyes scanning the street. The invitation delivered to his flat in Whitehaven Mansions had been penned in Dr. Vane's precise hand. A matter of utmost delicacy requires your presence at dinner. I trust in your discretion. The urgency intrigued Poirot, whose little gray cells thrived on the subtle discord of human affairs. He adjusted his overcoat against the damp chill and ascended the steps, his cane tapping a deliberate rhythm. The butler, a gaunt man named Perkins, ushered Poirot into a foyer of polished marble and gilded mirrors. The air carried the faint scent of beeswax and lavender, undercut by something sharper. Nervousness, perhaps, or fear. Perkins led Poirot to the dining room, a cavernous space where a crystal chandelier glittered above a mahogany table set for 6. The walls, lined with dark paneling, seemed to absorb the light, lending the room a conspiratorial air. Poirot's gaze swept over the guests, each a study in contrasts, their faces betraying secrets they could not voice. Dr. Archibald Vane, the host, stood at the head of the table. A tall man in his 50s, his hawkish features and piercing gray eyes suggested a mind as sharp as a scalpel. His tailored suit did little to soften the intensity of his presence, and his voice, when he greeted Poirot, carried a clipped authority. "Monsieur Poirot, your reputation precedes you," he said, though his smile did not reach his eyes. Beside him sat Lady Beatrice Vane, his wife, a woman of delicate beauty whose porcelain skin seemed almost translucent in the candlelight. Her hands, adorned with a single emerald ring, trembled as she reached for her glass, and her blue eyes darted nervously toward her husband. She spoke little, her voice a soft murmur as if afraid to disturb the air. Their daughter, Miss Clara Vane, was a striking contrast. At 22, she possessed a fierce intelligence that sparkled in her dark eyes. Her auburn hair was pinned loosely as if in defiance of the formal setting, and her posture suggested a readiness to challenge anyone who crossed her. She met Poirot's gaze with a bold curiosity, her lips curving into a half-smile that hinted at rebellion. Mr. Leonard Grayson, Dr. Vane's business partner, was a chemist whose nervous energy belied his polished appearance. His fingers toyed incessantly with his cufflinks, and his round face flushed when he spoke of their joint venture, a patent for a new neurological treatment. His deference to Vane was palpable, yet his eyes betrayed a flicker of resentment. Mrs. Evelyn Carver, a wealthy widow and one of Dr. Vane's patients, exuded an icy elegance. Her silver hair was swept into an impeccable chignon, and her black silk gown whispered of old money. She observed the room with a predator's calm, her smile sharp enough to cut glass. When she spoke, her voice was low and deliberate, as if every word were chosen to conceal more than it revealed. Finally, Dr. Julian Harrow, A rival neurologist lounged with an air of calculated nonchalance. His sharp features and sardonic smirk suggested a man who relished conflict. He and Vane exchanged glances like duelists, their history of professional rivalry an open secret. Harrow's presence at the table was a puzzle in itself, and Poirot noted the tension in his posture as if he were poised for a verbal thrust. Dinner was served, a rich consommé, followed by roasted pheasant and delicate asparagus spears. The conversation, however, was far from delicate. Dr. Vane dominated, expounding on his research into the human psyche with a fervor that bordered on obsession. The mind, he declared, is a machine we are only beginning to master. My work will revolutionize medicine. His tone carried a challenge, as if daring anyone to disagree. Clara, undaunted, interrupted. "And what of those who suffer under your experiments, Father? You treat patients like specimens." Her words hung in the air, drawing a sharp intake of breath from Lady Beatrice, who dropped her wine-glass. The crystal shattered, and Perkins rushed to clear the shards, but the tension remained unbroken. Grayson attempted to lighten the mood, stammering about their patent's potential, but Harrow cut him off. "A patent built on stolen ideas, perhaps?" he said, his smirk widening. Vane's face darkened, and Mrs. Carver's eyes gleamed with interest, as if savoring the discord. Poirot, sipping his wine, remained silent, his mind cataloguing every gesture, every word. The evening wore on, and the atmosphere grew heavier. Lady Beatrice excused herself briefly, citing a headache, and returned paler than before. Clara argued with her father about her ambition to study medicine, a notion he dismissed with a wave of his hand. "Women lack the temperament for science," he said, ignoring her glare. Grayson and Harrow continued their veiled barbs while Mrs. Carver watched, her silence more eloquent than words. As the clock struck 10, Dr. Vane rose abruptly. "I have correspondence to attend to," he announced, his tone final. He retreated to his study on the 3rd floor, a room known to be locked from the inside, where he often worked late into the night. The guests moved to the drawing room, save for Poirot, who lingered in the dining room, his fingers tracing the edge of his glass. The house felt alive with secrets, its silence oppressive. He noted the heavy oak door to the staircase, the faint creak of floorboards overhead, and the curious absence of any sound from Vane's study. Poirot's instincts, honed by years of unraveling human mysteries, told him that something was terribly wrong. The invitation, the tension, the locked study, it all pointed to a drama yet to unfold. He rejoined the others in the drawing room, where Clara played a restless melody on the pianoforte, and Mrs. Carver murmured to Grayson about investments. Harrow stood by the window, staring into the fog, while Lady Beatrice clutched a handkerchief, her eyes distant. As the grandfather clock ticked toward midnight, Poirot's unease grew. He excused himself, intending to check on Dr. Vane, when a piercing scream echoed through the house. It was Lady Beatrice, standing at the foot of the grand staircase, her face a mask of horror. "Archibald!" she cried. "Something's happened to Archibald." Poirot's heart quickened, but his mind remained calm. The game, as he often called it, had begun. With a nod to himself, he prepared to ascend the stairs, ready to confront whatever lay behind the locked door of Dr. Vane's study. Chapter 2. The Crime Discovered. The scream still echoed in the grand foyer of number 17 Rue de Lune, as Hercule Poirot, his small frame taut with purpose, led the charge up the curving mahogany staircase. Lady Beatrice Vane's cry had been raw, primal, cutting through the oppressive silence of the house like a blade. Behind Poirot, Captain Arthur Hastings, his loyal friend and chronicler, followed closely, his face pale but determined. The other guests, Miss Clara Vane, Mr. Leonard Grayson, Mrs. Evelyn Carver, and Dr. Julian Harrow, scrambled after them, their footsteps a chaotic rhythm on the polished wood. The butler, Perkins, trailed at a distance, his gaunt face etched with dread. The third-floor landing was dim, lit only by a single gas sconce that flickered like a dying star. The door to Dr. Archibald Vane's study stood at the end of the corridor, its heavy oak surface unyielding, the brass keyhole glinting faintly. Lady Beatrice, her delicate frame trembling, clutched the banister, her voice barely a whisper. "Archibald. He's in there." I heard a noise, a terrible thud. Her words dissolved into a sob, and Clara, her daughter, rushed to her side, her fierce demeanor softened by concern. Poirot, his green eyes sharp, raised a hand for silence. "Madame, mademoiselle, compose yourselves. We must ascertain the facts." He approached the door and rapped sharply, his knuckles precise against the wood. "Dr. Vane, it is Hercule Poirot. Open the door, s'il vous plaît." No response came, only the heavy silence of the house broken by the distant tick of the grandfather clock below. Hastings tried the handle, but it held fast. "Locked," he confirmed, his voice tight. Poirot's gaze flicked to the keyhole, noting the faint gleam of a key inside. "This is most curious," he murmured, his mustache twitching. "A locked room and yet a cry of distress. We must gain entry." Grayson, his round face flushed with agitation, stepped forward. "I'll break it down," he offered, his chemist's hands unsteady. Harrow, ever the skeptic, scoffed. "With your strength, Grayson, allow me." The two men, driven by a mix of bravado and fear, threw their shoulders against the door. The wood groaned, then splintered at the lock, and the door swung inward, revealing a scene that froze them all in place. Dr. Archibald Vane sat slumped over his desk, his hawkish face drained of color, his eyes staring blankly at the blotter before him. A letter opener, its silver handle gleaming, protruded from his chest, the blood staining his pristine shirt a dark crimson. The room was eerily pristine otherwise. Bookshelves lined with medical tomes stood untouched. A crystal decanter of brandy sat undisturbed, and the heavy velvet curtains hung motionless over a bolted window. The only sign of disorder was a single overturned ink pot, its contents pooling like a black omen across the desk. Mrs. Carver gasped, her icy composure cracking, while Clara stifled a cry, her hand gripping her mother's. Grayson muttered something incoherent, and Harrow's smirk vanished, replaced by a grim frown. Lady Beatrice swayed, and Hastings caught her before she collapsed, guiding her to a chair in the corridor. Poirot, unmoved by the chaos, stepped into the study, his movements deliberate, his senses attuned to every detail. "Mon Dieu," he said softly. "This is a murder most calculated." He bent over the body, careful not to disturb the scene. The letter opener had been driven deep, a single forceful strike that suggested both strength and precision. Vane's hands lay limp, one clutching a pen, the other resting near a half-finished letter. Poirot read the words aloud. "I know your secret. Meet me tonight, or I shall reveal all." The letter was unsigned, addressed to no one, its ink still wet. Inspector Japp arrived within the hour, his burly frame filling the doorway as he surveyed the scene with his usual blend of skepticism and efficiency. "Blimey, Poirot, you've landed in it again," he said, scratching his chin. Locked room murder, no less. Door locked from the inside, window bolted, key still in the lock. How's a killer supposed to get in and out?" Poirot's eyes gleamed. "That, mon ami, is the question. But first we observe." He noted the absence of fingerprints on the letter opener, wiped clean, he suspected, with a cloth. The window, triple-bolted, showed no signs of tampering, its frame sealed tight against the London fog. The carpet bore no unusual marks, save for a faint smudge near the desk, barely noticeable. Poirot's nose twitched as he detected a faint medicinal scent. Chloroform, perhaps. lingering in the air. A curious detail caught his eye. Vane's pocket watch, a gold timepiece pinned to his waistcoat, had stopped at 11:15 p.m. Poirot tapped it gently, confirming it was broken, the hands frozen. "This," he said to Hastings, "is not an accident. The watch, it tells us something, or someone wishes it to." He examined the desk further, finding a small drawer slightly ajar. Inside was an empty vial, its label scratched off, the faint residue of a chemical confirming his suspicion of chloroform. The household was in disarray. Lady Beatrice, revived with smelling salts, sat trembling in the drawing room, her emerald ring glinting as she clutched a handkerchief. Clara paced, her auburn hair falling loose, her eyes blazing with a mix of grief and defiance. Grayson, sweating profusely, hovered near the fireplace while Mrs. Carver stood apart, her silver hair catching the lamplight as she watched the proceedings with unnerving calm. Harrow, lighting a cigarette, leaned against the mantel, his nonchalance a thin veneer over his unease. Japp began his interrogations, his notebook open, his pencil poised. "Right then. Where was everyone between 10 p.m., when Vane went to his study, and midnight, when the scream was heard?" Lady Beatrice claimed she was in her bedroom nursing a headache and heard nothing until the thud that prompted her scream. Clara said she was in the library reading medical journals, her alibi unconfirmed. Grayson and Mrs. Carver vouched for each other, claiming they were in the drawing room discussing investments. Harrow, with a wry smile, said he'd stepped outside for a cigarette, alone, at the back of the house. Poirot listened, his head tilted, his fingers steepled. Each alibi was plausible, yet each carried a shadow of doubt. He noted the tension in Grayson's voice, the way Mrs. Carver's eyes lingered on the others, the faint tremor in Harrow's hand as he lit his cigarette. Lady Beatrice's story seemed fragile, and Clara's defiance suggested more than grief. The letter on the desk, with its cryptic threat, hinted at blackmail. But against whom? Poirot returned to the study, his mind racing. The locked door, the bolted window, the stopped watch, all pointed to an impossible crime. Yet Poirot knew that impossibility was merely a challenge to the little gray cells. He examined the key in the lock, noting its position, and tested the window bolts, finding them secure. The chloroform scent was strongest near the desk, suggesting Vane had been subdued before the fatal blow. But how had the killer entered and exited a sealed room? "Mon ami," Poirot said to Hastings, who hovered anxiously, "this is no crime of passion. The murderer is clever, methodical. They wish us to believe the impossible, but Hercule Poirot is not so easily deceived." He paused, his gaze falling on the overturned inkpot. A single drop had splattered onto a book, its title obscured by the stain. Poirot lifted it carefully, revealing a medical text on neurological disorders. "Curious," he murmured. "This book, it was moved. But why?" As Japp continued his questions downstairs, Poirot stood alone in the study, the weight of the mystery settling around him. The fog outside pressed against the windows, and the house seemed to hold its breath. The truth, Poirot knew, lay in the details. The vial, the watch, the letter, the smudge. He would unravel them all, but for now the stage was set, the players revealed, and the game of deduction had begun. Chapter 3. Investigation begins. The study of Dr. Archibald Vane, bathed in the dim glow of a single gas lamp, seemed to hold its secrets tightly as Hercule Poirot stood at its center, his green eyes scanning every detail. The air was heavy with the faint medicinal tang of chloroform, and the body of the neurologist remained slumped over his desk, the letter opener in his chest a stark reminder of the violence that had shattered the night. The door, now splintered from being forced open, hung ajar, and the bolted window mocked the notion of an intruder. Inspector Japp, his notebook filled with scrawled notes, paced the corridor while Captain Hastings hovered near Poirot, his earnest face a mix of awe and unease. "Poirot, old chap," Hastings said, his voice low. "This is a proper puzzle. A locked room, a dead man, and no way in or out. It's impossible." Poirot's mustache twitched, a faint smile playing at his lips. "Impossible, mon ami. Non, non. The impossible is merely that which we have not yet understood. The little gray cells, they will find the way." He turned back to the desk, his gloved fingers tracing the edge of the overturned inkpot, its black contents staining the blotter like a dark prophecy. Poirot's investigation began with the suspects, each summoned to the drawing room for questioning. The household was a study in tension. Lady Beatrice Vane sat on a velvet settee, her delicate hands clutching a lace handkerchief, her eyes red-rimmed but distant. Clara Vane, her auburn hair disheveled, stood by the fireplace, her defiance tempered by grief. Leonard Grayson, the chemist, fidgeted with his cufflinks, his round face slick with sweat. Mrs. Evelyn Carver, the wealthy widow, maintained her icy composure, her silver hair gleaming under the chandelier. Dr. Julian Harrow, the autumn rival neurologist, leaned against a bookcase, his sardonic smirk replaced by a wary frown. Perkins, the butler, hovered at the edges, his gaunt frame almost invisible in the shadows. Poirot began with Lady Beatrice, his tone gentle yet probing. "Madame, you say you were in your bedroom with a headache, oui? Yet you heard a thud that brought you to the study. Tell me, what was this sound, and when precisely did it occur?" Lady Beatrice's voice trembled as she replied, "It was just before midnight. A heavy sound like something falling. I thought Archibald had dropped a book, but when I called out and got no answer, I panicked." Her hands twisted the handkerchief, and Poirot noted the faint tremor, wondering if it stemmed from fear or guilt. Clara was next, her dark eyes meeting Poirot's without flinching. "I was in the library reading," she said, her voice steady despite her pale cheeks. "Father and I argued at dinner, but I was studying medical texts, trying to prove him wrong about women in science." She gestured to a stack of journals, but Poirot noted their pristine condition, as if untouched that evening. "Mademoiselle," he said, "your passion is admirable, but your alibi, it is not yet verified. Did anyone see you in the library?" Clara's jaw tightened, and she shook her head. Grayson and Mrs. Carver claimed to have been together in the drawing room discussing investments. "We were here the whole time," Grayson stammered, his eyes darting to Mrs. Carver for confirmation. She nodded, her voice smooth as silk. "Indeed, Mr. Grayson was advising me on a financial matter. We heard nothing until Lady Beatrice's scream." Poirot's gaze lingered on Mrs. Carver, noting the faint curl of her lips, as if she enjoyed the scrutiny. Her alibi tied to Grayson's was convenient, perhaps too convenient. Harrow, questioned last, admitted to stepping outside for a cigarette at around 11 p.m. "I needed air," he said, his tone clipped. Vane's arrogance was stifling. He claimed to have been alone, standing by the garden gate, but offered no witnesses. Poirot's eyes narrowed. "And you saw nothing unusual, Doctor? No one lurking in the fog?" Harrow shrugged, his nonchalance strained. "Just the usual London gloom." Each suspect had a motive, Poirot realized as he returned to the study to examine the scene further. Lady Beatrice's nervous demeanor suggested fear of her husband's rumored infidelity, whispers of which had reached Poirot's ears during dinner. Clara's argument with her father revealed a deep resentment, her ambition thwarted by his control. Grayson faced financial ruin if Vane withdrew from their partnership, a fact gleaned from overheard snippets about a failing patent. Mrs. Carver, a patient of Vane's, risked exposure of her addiction to his experimental treatments, a scandal that would ruin her social standing. Harrow's professional rivalry was no secret, his career overshadowed by Vane's success. Poirot knelt by the desk, his attention drawn to the empty chloroform vial in the drawer. Its scratched-off label suggested deliberate concealment, and the faint residue confirmed his suspicion of its use. "The murderer," he murmured to Hastings, "subdued Dr. Vane before the fatal blow. But how did they enter this locked room?" He tested the window bolts again, finding them secure, the frame unmarred. The key in the lock was undisturbed, its position indicating it had been turned from within. Yet the smudge on the carpet near the desk caught his eye again, a faint mark, possibly from a shoe, but too indistinct to identify. The stopped pocket watch, frozen at 11:15 p.m., was another puzzle. Poirot examined it closely, noting a hairline crack in the glass. "This watch," he said, "was stopped deliberately, perhaps to mislead us about the time of death, but why 11:15? It is too precise to be chance." He turned to the half-finished letter. "I know your secret. Meet me tonight or I shall reveal all." The words suggested blackmail, but the absence of an addressee was deliberate, Poirot sensed, meant to sow confusion. He moved to the bookshelves, running his fingers along the spines. One book, a treatise on neurological disorders, was slightly askew, the ink stain from the overturned pot marking its cover. Poirot opened it, finding a folded slip of paper tucked inside, a list of initials and numbers, possibly a code. CV, LG, EC, JH, he read aloud, recognizing the initials of Clara, Grayson, Mrs. Carver, and Harrow. The numbers beside each were cryptic, perhaps dates or sums. "A clue," Poirot said, "or another distraction." Japp, rejoining them, reported his findings. "No fingerprints on the letter opener, wiped clean, I'd wager. The wound's clean, too. One strike, straight to the heart. Whoever did this knew what they were doing." Poirot nodded, his mind racing. The chloroform suggested premeditation, the locked room a calculated challenge. He examined the door's lock, noting a faint scratch near the keyhole, barely visible. "This," he said, "may be significant. The lock was tampered with, perhaps from the outside." Downstairs, the household remained in turmoil. Clara comforted her mother, but her glances toward the study were sharp, as if searching for answers. Grayson's nervous pacing had intensified, and Mrs. Carver's calm seemed almost unnatural, her eyes tracking Poirot's every move. Harrow, lighting another cigarette, stood apart, his expression unreadable. Perkins, the butler, offered tea, but his hands shook as he poured, betraying his unease. Poirot gathered the suspects once more, his voice calm but commanding. "Mes amis, a murder has been committed under our noses in a room locked from within. Each of you had reason to wish Dr. Vane harm, and each of you claims innocence. But the truth, it hides in the details, the vial, the watch, the letter, the lock. Hercule Poirot will find it." His words hung in the air, met with uneasy silence. As the clock struck 2 a.m., Poirot returned to the study, his mind a whirl of possibilities. The chloroform, the stopped watch, the cryptic list, all were pieces of a puzzle that defied logic. Yet Poirot knew that logic was his ally. "The murderer," he told Hastings, "has left a trail, however faint. We must follow it step by step until the truth is revealed." The fog outside thickened, and the house seemed to close in around them, its secrets waiting to be uncovered. Chapter 4. Clues and Red Herrings. The fog outside number 17, Rue de Lune, thickened as the night wore on, wrapping the house in a shroud that seemed to mirror the confusion within. Hercule Poirot stood in Dr. Archibald Vane's study, his green eyes darting from the overturned inkpot to the bolted window, his mind a whirl of deductions. The locked room murder, door secured, window sealed, key inside, presented a puzzle that delighted his meticulous nature. Captain Hastings, ever loyal, hovered nearby, his brow furrowed, while Inspector Japp coordinated constables downstairs, their heavy boots echoing in the silent house. The suspects, confined to the drawing room, waited under a cloud of suspicion, their alibis fragile as glass, Poirot's investigation deepened, his little gray cells sifting through the evidence. The empty chloroform vial, the stopped pocket watch at 11:15 p.m., the cryptic letter threatening to reveal a secret, and the faint scratch near the keyhole were tantalizing clues, but Poirot knew the truth often hid behind distractions. He returned to the desk, examining the coded slip of paper found in the medical text. The initials, CV, LG, EC, JH, matched Clara Vane, Leonard Grayson, Evelyn Carver, and Julian Harrow, each paired with numbers, 12 to 3, 500, 719, 2000. Were they dates, debts, or something more sinister? Poirot tucked the paper into his pocket, suspecting it was either a vital clue or a clever misdirection. He moved to the bookshelves, running his gloved fingers along the spines. A faint irregularity caught his eye, a hidden compartment behind a row of journals. With a gentle press, a panel clicked open, revealing a small cache of documents. Patient files, heavily redacted, with Mrs. Carver's name prominent. One note described her dependency on experimental sedatives, a potential scandal if exposed. Another file mentioned Harrow's discredited research, suggesting Vane had evidence of academic fraud. "Mon ami," Poirot said to Hastings, "Dr. Vane was a collector of secrets. This makes him dangerous, and a target." Downstairs, Poirot questioned the suspects further, his tone disarming yet precise. He began with Clara, whose defiance masked a flicker of fear. "Mademoiselle, your father opposed your medical ambitions. Did he, perhaps, hold something over you?" Clara's eyes flashed. "He wanted to control me, yes, but I didn't kill him. I was in the library, as I said." Poirot noted a tremor in her voice and a glance toward her mother, Lady Beatrice, who sat pale and silent. Was Clara protecting someone? Grayson, sweating profusely, was next. "Mr. Grayson, your partnership with Dr. Vane was strained. Financial troubles, perhaps?" Grayson's cufflinks clicked nervously. "We had disagreements, but I was with Mrs. Carver. Ask her." Mrs. Carver nodded, her silver hair catching the light, but her calm demeanor seemed calculated, her eyes too steady. Poirot pressed, "Madam Carver, these sedatives. Did Dr. Vane threaten to expose your reliance?" Her smile tightened. "He was my doctor, nothing more." Harrow, lighting a cigarette, admitted to lingering resentment. "Vane stole my ideas years ago," he said, exhaling smoke. "But I was outside smoking when he died." Poirot's gaze fell on the cigarette, noting its brand. Turkish, rare, and identical to a stub found near the garden gate. Yet the stub was unburnt, its paper pristine, as if placed deliberately. "A curious detail," Poirot murmured, suspecting a planted clue. Lady Beatrice, questioned last, clutched her handkerchief. "I was in my room until I heard the thud," she whispered. "Archibald was difficult, but I loved him." Her emerald ring glinted, and Poirot noticed a faint bruise on her wrist, quickly hidden by her sleeve. Was it a sign of domestic strife or an unrelated mark? A new clue emerged when Perkins, the butler, hesitantly approached. "Sir, I found this in the foyer," he said, producing a torn photograph. It showed Dr. Vane with an unknown woman, her face obscured, the edges ragged as if ripped in haste. It was under a rug near the staircase. Poirot examined it, noting the woman's elegant attire and a faint inscription. Paris, 1922. Was this evidence of an affair, a blackmail scheme, or another distraction? Outside, Japp's constables searched the grounds, prompted by a groundskeeper's report of a shadowy figure near the house at 11 p.m. They found nothing, no footprints, no signs of entry. Poirot dismissed the sighting as a red herring, likely a neighbor or a trick of the fog. "The murderer is within, not without," he told Japp, his voice firm. This figure, it is too convenient, too vague. Poirot returned to the study, his attention drawn to the chloroform vial. Its scratched-off label suggested deliberate concealment, but a faint trace of adhesive revealed a partial word. Pharma. Mrs. Carver's late husband, a pharmacist, had owned a company known for such vials. A connection, Poirot said to Hastings, but not yet proof. He examined the smudge on the carpet again, now suspecting it was from a woman's shoe, its shape too delicate for a man's boot. Clara or Mrs. Carver, perhaps. The stopped watch puzzled him most. The crack in its glass suggested force, yet Vane's body showed no signs of a struggle beyond the fatal wound. Poirot hypothesized the killer had smashed the watch to mislead the timeline. But why 11:15 p.m.? He checked Vane's medical bag, finding a syringe with traces of a sedative, possibly used with the chloroform to ensure Vane's compliance. The murderer, Poirot mused, planned every detail yet left these traces. Why? A servant's gossip provided another lead. Clara had been seen slipping into her father's study days earlier, searching his desk. When confronted, Clara admitted to looking for his will, fearing he'd cut her out for defying him. "I found nothing," she said, her cheeks flushing. Poirot noted her candor but wondered if she'd found more than she admitted, perhaps the coded list or the patient files. Grayson's ledger obtained by Japp revealed another clue. Debts to Vane totaling thousands with a deadline looming. "He was pressuring me," Grayson confessed, his voice breaking. "But I didn't kill him." His desperation was palpable, but his alibi with Mrs. Carver held for now. Poirot, however, noticed Mrs. Carver's handbag, its clasp bearing the same pharma logo as the vial. A coincidence or a link? The unburnt cigarette stub nagged at Poirot. Harrow's brand, yes, but its pristine state suggested it was placed, not smoked. Had someone framed Harrow, or was he careless enough to leave it? Poirot tested the garden gate, finding it locked, further discrediting an outsider's entry. "The clues," he told Hastings, "they multiply, but they also deceive. We must separate the truth from the lies." As dawn broke, the fog lifting slightly, Poirot gathered the suspects in the drawing room. "Mes amis," he said, his voice steady. "Dr. Vane was killed by someone in this house. The chloroform, the watch, the letter, the photograph, they point to a mind both cunning and desperate. But Hercule Poirot sees through the fog." His words elicited gasps and glances, each suspect eyeing the others. Clara clutched her mother's hand, Grayson mopped his brow, Mrs. Carver's smile faltered, and Harrow's cigarette trembled. Poirot returned to the study, his mind racing. The coded list, the hidden files, the torn photograph, the unburnt cigarette, the chloroform vial. All were pieces of a mosaic, but some were false, designed to mislead. He re-examined the scratch near the keyhole, now suspecting a tool had been used to manipulate the lock. "The method," he murmured, "is ingenious, but the motive is the key. Who had the most to lose?" The house grew quieter, the suspects retreating to their rooms under Japp's watchful eye. Poirot stood alone, the study's silence pressing against him. The clues were mounting, but so were the red herrings. He knew the truth lay in the details, the faint smudge, the cryptic numbers, the scent of chloroform. With a nod to himself, he resolved to unravel the deception, step by careful step, as the mystery of Rue de Lune deepened. Chapter 5. Complications and Twists. The first light of dawn crept through the fog, casting a pale glow over number 17 Rue de Lune, but the house remained cloaked in tension. Hercule Poirot stood in the drawing room, his green eyes sharp as he surveyed the suspects, each a piece in the intricate puzzle of Dr. Archibald Vane's murder. The locked study, the chloroform vial, the stopped watch at 11:15 p.m. The cryptic letter, the torn photograph, and the unburnt cigarette stub had woven a tapestry of clues. But Poirot knew some were false, designed to obscure the truth. Captain Hastings, his loyal companion, stood by his side while Inspector Japp's constables guarded the exits, their presence a reminder of the crime's gravity. A sudden commotion shattered the morning's uneasy calm. Perkins, the butler, burst into the room, his gaunt face ashen. "Miss Clara, she's gone," he stammered, holding a crumpled note. Poirot took it, his gloved fingers unfolding the paper with care. In Clara Vane's bold script it read, "I killed father to escape his control. I cannot stay." The words sent a ripple of shock through the room. Lady Beatrice gasped, clutching her handkerchief, while Leonard Grayson's jaw dropped, and Mrs. Evelyn Carver's icy composure flickered. Dr. Julian Harrow, lighting another cigarette, raised an eyebrow, his smirk returning. Poirot's moustache twitched. "This note," he said, "it is dramatic, oui. But is it the truth?" "No, I think not. Mademoiselle Clara is no murderer, but she is afraid." He turned to Japp. "We must find her, Inspector, before she comes to harm." Japp dispatched a constable to search the grounds while Poirot questioned Perkins. The butler admitted seeing Clara slip out at dawn, carrying a small valise, heading toward the foggy streets of London. "She looked frantic, sir," Perkins said, his voice low. Poirot's investigation took an urgent turn. He suspected Clara's flight was a desperate act, perhaps to protect someone. Her mother, Lady Beatrice, whose bruised wrist and nervous demeanor hinted at hidden turmoil. But another twist emerged when Japp uncovered a secret passage behind the study's bookshelf, discovered during a routine search of the house. The panel, concealed by a false bookcase, led to a dusty attic, its floorboards untouched for years. "Could the killer have used this?" Japp asked, his eyes gleaming with hope. Poirot examined the passage, his cane tapping the floor. "Non, mon ami. The dust is undisturbed, the cobwebs intact. This passage is a relic, not a route for murder. Yet its existence raised questions. Had Vane known of it? Was it a deliberate distraction, or had the killer hoped to use it and failed?" Poirot filed the discovery away, his mind returning to Clara's note. Tracking Clara became the priority. Poirot, Hastings, and a constable traced her to a nearby boarding house in a grimy corner of London, where the landlady confirmed a young woman matching Clara's description had rented a room under a false name. Poirot found her in a sparsely furnished attic, her auburn hair loose, her eyes red from crying. "Mademoiselle," he said gently, "why do you run? This note, it is a lie, oui." Clara's defiance crumbled. "I wrote it to protect Mother," she confessed. "Father was cruel to her. I thought, if I took the blame, you'd stop suspecting her." Poirot's eyes softened, but his questions were relentless. "And did you see anything the night of the murder?" Clara hesitated, then admitted to overhearing a heated exchange between her father and Mrs. Carver in the study days prior. She was furious, saying he'd ruin her. I didn't think much of it until... Her voice trailed off. Poirot noted this, suspecting Mrs. Carver's calm facade hid a deeper motive. Back at number 17, another complication arose. Grayson, caught trying to slip out the back gate with a packed bag, was detained by Japp's men. His stammered excuse, "I needed air," rang hollow. A search of his bag revealed forged documents tied to the patent he shared with Vane, papers that suggested Grayson had altered data to secure funding. "Vane was going to expose me," Grayson admitted, his face crumpling. "But I swear I didn't kill him." Poirot observed Grayson's panic, wondering if his desperation was genuine or a performance. Mrs. Carver became Poirot's focus. Her connection to the chloroform vial, bearing her late husband's pharma logo, was damning, and Clara's revelation of their argument added weight. Poirot confronted her in the drawing room, his tone deceptively mild. "Madam, your dependence on Dr. Vane's treatments, it was a secret worth killing for, no?" Mrs. Carver's smile was razor-sharp. "You overreach, Monsieur Poirot. I was in the drawing room with Mr. Grayson. You have no proof." Yet her handbag, left unattended, revealed a small key, possibly to a locked drawer or safe. Poirot pocketed it discreetly, intending to investigate. A new clue surfaced when Hastings, searching Vane's bedroom, found a locked diary hidden under a floorboard. The key from Mrs. Carver's bag opened it, revealing entries about her addiction and Vane's plan to expose her unless she paid a substantial sum. "Blackmail," Hastings said, shocked. Poirot nodded. "Oui, but is it the motive or another thread in the web?" The diary also mentioned Harrow's falsified research and Grayson's debts, confirming Vane's habit of collecting leverage. The torn photograph, showing Vane with an unknown woman, took on new significance when Poirot noticed a faint reflection in the image, a Parisian café sign. He recalled Mrs. Carver's trips to Paris, mentioned casually at dinner. Was she the woman, or was this another misdirection? Poirot tested the unburnt cigarette stub again, confirming it was Harrow's brand, but untouched by flame. "Someone wishes to implicate Dr. Harrow," he told Hastings, "but they are careless. The stub is too perfect." A second minor crime complicated matters further. A stolen document from Vane's safe, reported missing by Perkins. The safe, hidden behind a portrait, contained financial records but was now empty. Poirot suspected the theft was linked to the murder, perhaps to cover Grayson's debts or Mrs. Carver's payments. The timing, coinciding with Clara's flight, suggested a coordinated effort to muddy the investigation. Poirot's suspicions crystallized around Mrs. Carver. Her access to chloroform, her motive for blackmail, and her poised demeanor marked her as a formidable suspect. Yet Grayson's attempted flight and Clara's false confession kept the field open. Lady Beatrice's bruise and Harrow's rivalry could not be dismissed, and the secret passage, though unused, hinted at hidden knowledge within the house. As noon approached, Poirot gathered the suspects in the drawing room, his presence commanding silence. "Mes amis," he said, "the murder of Dr. Vane is a puzzle with many pieces, some true, some false. The note from Mademoiselle Clara, the stolen document, the passage, all are complications, but they bring us closer to the truth. The murderer is among us, and Hercule Poirot will not rest until they are unmasked." His words drew sharp glances: Grayson's panic, Mrs. Carver's icy stare, Harrow's clenched jaw, and Lady Beatrice's trembling hands. Alone in the study, Poirot re-examined the clues. The chloroform vial linked to Mrs. Carver, the diary confirmed her motive, and the scratch near the keyhole suggested a sophisticated method. Yet Clara's confession, though false, hinted at a deeper loyalty, and Grayson's forgery pointed to desperation. The unburnt cigarette and torn photograph were distractions, but the coded list, CV, LG, EC, JH, nagged at him. Were the numbers patient codes, blackmail sums, or something else? The house seemed to pulse with secrets, the fog outside a mirror of the confusion within. Poirot stood by the bolted window, his mind racing. "The murderer," he murmured to Hastings, "has woven a clever trap, but they have left traces, the vial, the key, the diary. We are close, mon ami, but the final twist awaits." As the clock ticked on, Poirot resolved to untangle the web, his little gray cells poised for the revelation to come. Chapter 6. The Revelation. The drawing room of number 17, Rue de Lune, was thick with anticipation as Hercule Poirot gathered the suspects under the flickering glow of the chandelier. The fog outside pressed against the windows, a silent witness to the drama within. Lady Beatrice Vane sat rigid, her handkerchief crumpled in her trembling hands. Clara Vane, returned from her brief flight, stood defiantly by her mother, her auburn hair catching the light. Leonard Grayson, his round face slick, with sweat, clutched his cufflinks as if they anchored him. Mrs. Evelyn Carver, her silver hair impeccable, maintained an icy calm, her eyes sharp as they met Poirot's. Dr. Julian Harrow leaned against the mantel, his cigarette unlit, his smirk replaced by a wary tension. Inspector Japp stood by the door, his notebook ready, while Captain Hastings watched Poirot with bated breath, sensing the climax of the mystery. Poirot paced slowly, his patent leather shoes silent on the Persian rug, his green eyes gleaming with purpose. "Mes amis," he began, his voice steady and deliberate. "The murder of Dr. Archibald Vane is a puzzle most ingenious. A locked room, a chloroform vial, a stopped watch, a cryptic letter, a torn photograph, and a web of motives. But Hercule Poirot has unraveled the truth hidden in the smallest details. The murderer is among us, and now I shall reveal all." He paused, letting the silence weigh on the room. Lady Beatrice's breath hitched, Clara's jaw tightened. Grayson shifted uneasily. Mrs. Carver's smile faltered, and Harrow's fingers twitched. Poirot raised a gloved hand. "Let us begin with the crime. Dr. Vane was found in his study, a letter opener in his heart. The door locked from within, the window bolted, the key in the lock. An impossible murder, But no crime is impossible to the little gray cells." Poirot turned to the desk, conjuring the scene in his mind. "The chloroform vial found in a drawer tells us Dr. Vane was subdued before the fatal blow. The stopped watch at 11:15 p.m. when its glass cracked suggests a deliberate act to mislead the timeline. The letter, 'I know your secret, meet me tonight or I shall reveal all,' points to blackmail. The unburnt cigarette stub, the torn photograph, the coded list, the hidden patient files, all are clues, but some are false, designed to deceive." He faced the suspects, his gaze piercing. "Each of you had motive. Madame Beatrice, you feared your husband's cruelty and infidelity, suggested by the bruise on your wrist and the photograph. Mademoiselle Clara, your ambition clashed with your father's control, and your false confession was a brave but misguided act. Monsieur Grayson, your forged patent and debts to Vane threatened ruin. Dr. Harrow, your rivalry and discredited research fueled resentment. And Madame Carver, your addiction to Vane's treatments risked social disgrace, confirmed by his diary and the chloroform vial linked to your late husband's pharmacy." Gasps rippled through the room, but Poirot pressed on. "Let us examine the method. The locked room is the heart of the mystery. The door was locked, the key inside, yet a faint scratch near the keyhole suggested tampering. The window, bolted, showed no signs of entry. The secret passage, though intriguing, was unused, its dust undisturbed. How then did the murderer strike?" Poirot's eyes locked onto Mrs. Carver. "Madame Carver, you are the architect of this crime. Your composure, your knowledge of chemistry, and your access to chloroform mark you as the killer." Mrs. Carver's smile vanished, her hands clenching. "Preposterous," she said, but her voice wavered. Poirot continued, undeterred. "You slipped chloroform into Dr. Vane's tea at dinner, a small dose to dull his senses. Later, you entered the study using a magnetized needle, a tool from your husband's pharmacy, to manipulate the lock's tumblers through the keyhole, a method most ingenious. You stabbed Vane with the letter opener, wiped it clean, and locked the door again with the needle, leaving the key inside." He paced, his voice rising. "The stopped watch was your misdirection. You smashed it to suggest an earlier time of death, confusing the timeline. The letter, left half-finished, was your creation, meant to imply blackmail and sow suspicion. The unburnt cigarette stub bearing Dr. Harrow's brand was placed to frame him, but its pristine state betrayed your hand. The torn photograph suggesting an affair was another distraction, as was the coded list planted to implicate all suspects. Clara gasped, "But why her?" Poirot turned to Mrs. Carver. "Your motive, madame, was survival. Dr. Vane's diary revealed his plan to expose your addiction, a scandal that would ruin you. You paid him to keep silent, but his demands grew. You argued with him days before, as Mademoiselle Clara overheard. You could not risk exposure, so you killed him." Mrs. Carver stood, her eyes blazing. "You have no proof, Monsieur Poirot." Poirot smiled faintly. "Au contraire. The key in your handbag found by Captain Hastings opened Vane's diary, which detailed your payments. The chloroform vial bears your husband's pharma logo, and the smudge on the carpet matches the heel of your shoe left as you stood over the body. The magnetized needle hidden in your room was found by Inspector Japp this morning. You are undone, madame." The room erupted. Lady Beatrice sobbed. Clara gripped her mother's hand. Grayson exhaled in relief, and Harrow's cigarette fell unlit to the floor. Mrs. Carver's composure shattered, her voice cold but steady. "Very well, Poirot. I underestimated you. Vane was a monster, bleeding me dry. I had no choice." Japp stepped forward, handcuffs ready. "That's enough, Mrs. Carver. You're under arrest." Poirot addressed the others. "Madame Beatrice, your fear drove you to silence, but you are innocent. Mademoiselle Clara, your confession was noble but unnecessary. Monsieur Grayson, your forgery is a crime but not murder. Dr. Harrow, your rivalry clouded your judgment, but you did not kill. The truth, it is in the details, the vial, the needle, the smudge." As Japp led Mrs. Carver away, Poirot turned to Hastings. "Mon ami, the locked room is no longer a mystery. The murderer used science and cunning, but they could not outwit Hercule Poirot." He adjusted his tie, his mustache twitching with satisfaction. The household, though shaken, began to breathe again. The weight of suspicion lifted. Poirot lingered in the study, the scene of the crime now quiet. The fog outside was lifting, revealing the gray outline of London. He re-examined the clues, ensuring no detail had escaped him. The chloroform vial, the diary, the needle, all confirmed his deductions. The unburnt cigarette, the torn photograph, and the coded list were clever distractions, but they crumbled under scrutiny. The secret passage, a relic, played no role, and Clara's flight, though dramatic, was a red herring born of loyalty. He reflected on the motive. Mrs. Carver's addiction, her fear of ruin, and Vane's blackmail had driven her to a desperate act. The magnetized needle, a novel method aligned with her chemical expertise, making the locked room murder possible. The stopped watch, set to 11:15 p.m., had nearly fooled Japp, but Poirot's observation of the tea's faint chemical residue, missed by all but him, sealed her fate. As the clock struck noon, Poirot descended to the drawing room where the remaining suspects gathered. "Mes amis," he said, "the truth is revealed and justice will follow. Dr. Vane's secrets destroyed him, but they will destroy no more." Lady Beatrice wept softly, Clara's arm around her. Grayson, chastened, vowed to settle his debts honestly. Harrow, his arrogance dimmed, nodded in reluctant respect. Poirot stepped into the foyer, the house's oppressive silence easing. "The little gray cells," he told Hastings. "They see what others overlook. The murderer thought to outsmart us, but they forgot one thing. Hercule Poirot does not fail." With a final glance at the study, he prepared to leave Rue de Lune. The mystery solved, the truth laid bare. Chapter 7. Justice served the drawing room of number 17, Rue de Lune, bathed in the pale light of a late October afternoon, seemed to exhale as the weight of Dr. Archibald Vane's murder lifted. Hercule Poirot stood at the center, his diminutive frame commanding, his green eyes reflecting the satisfaction of a puzzle solved. The revelation of Mrs. Evelyn Carver as the murderer had stunned the household, And now, with Inspector Japp's handcuffs glinting on her wrists, the air was thick with relief and lingering sorrow. Captain Hastings, ever the faithful chronicler, stood by Poirot, his face a mixture of awe and exhaustion. The remaining suspects, Lady Beatrice Vane, Clara Vane, Leonard Grayson, and Dr. Julian Harrow, gathered in uneasy silence, their futures forever altered by the events of the night. Mrs. Carver, her silver hair still impeccable despite her downfall, stood defiant as Japp prepared to escort her to the waiting police van. Her icy composure had cracked, but her voice retained a chilling edge. "You think you've won, Monsieur Poirot," she said, her eyes narrowing. "But Vane was a parasite, bleeding me dry. I regret nothing." Poirot's mustache twitched, his expression serene. "Madame, you regret only that you did not outwit Hercule Poirot. Your crime was clever, but the truth, it always reveals itself." Japp, gruff but efficient, nodded to Poirot. "You've done it again, old chap. A locked-room murder solved in a day. Scotland Yard owes you one." He gestured to his constables, who flanked Mrs. Carver as she was led from the room. Her footsteps echoed down the marble foyer, a stark contrast to the oppressive silence that had gripped the house since the murder. Poirot watched her go, his mind retracing the intricate web of clues that had led to her unmasking. The household, though freed from suspicion, bore the scars of the ordeal. Lady Beatrice, her delicate frame trembling, sat on the velvet settee, her emerald ring glinting as she clutched Clara's hand. "It's over, Mother," Clara whispered, her auburn hair falling loose, her defiance softened by relief. Lady Beatrice nodded, her voice barely audible. I feared it was my fault somehow. Archibald's cruelty drove us all to despair." Poirot, overhearing, approached with gentle deference. "Madame, you are not to blame. Dr. Vane's secrets ensnared many, but you are free now." Clara met Poirot's gaze, her dark eyes filled with gratitude. "I thought I had to protect her, Monsieur Poirot. My note, my running away, it was foolish." Poirot smiled faintly. "Mademoiselle, your loyalty is admirable, but the truth does not need such sacrifices. Your father's control is ended, and your future it is yours to shape." Clara's lips trembled, and she nodded, a spark of her ambition returning. Poirot noted her resolve, certain she would pursue her medical studies despite her father's opposition. Leonard Grayson, his round face no longer flushed with panic, stood by the fireplace, his cufflinks still but his hands unsteady. I owe you an apology, Poirot," he stammered. "My forgery, my debts. I thought Vane's death would save me, but I swear I didn't kill him." Poirot's eyes softened, though his tone was firm. "Monsieur Grayson, your crimes are financial, not fatal. But you must make amends. Honesty, it is the only path now." Grayson nodded, his shoulders sagging. "I'll settle the debts. Start anew. No more lies." Poirot observed the chemist's chastened demeanor, satisfied that his brush with ruin had sparked reform. Dr. Julian Harrow, his cigarette unlit, leaned against the bookcase, his arrogance dimmed but not extinguished. "You've cleared my name, Poirot," he said, his voice grudging. "But Vane's shadow still lingers. My career's in tatters." Poirot tilted his head. "Doctor, your rivalry with Vane was bitter, but it did not make you a murderer. Rebuild your reputation with integrity, not resentment." Harrow's jaw tightened, but he nodded, a flicker of respect in his eyes. Poirot knew Harrow's pride would survive, though. His path would be harder now. The butler, Perkins, hovered at the edges, his gaunt frame less ghostly in the daylight. He approached Poirot, his voice low. "Sir, thank you. The house feels lighter now." Poirot inclined his head. "Monsieur Perkins, you served faithfully, even in fear. Continue to do so and all will be well." The butler's eyes glistened and he retreated, his duty reaffirmed. Poirot returned to the study one final time, the scene of the crime now quiet, its secrets laid bare. The desk, still stained with ink, held no more mysteries. The chloroform vial, the stopped watch, the cryptic letter, the torn photograph, the unburnt cigarette stub, all had played their part. The magnetized needle found in Mrs. Carver's room was the key to the locked room puzzle, a testament to her chemical ingenuity. The diary, unlocked by her key, had confirmed her motive, Vane's blackmail over her addiction, a threat to her social standing she could not endure. Poirot retraced his deductions for Hastings, who listened with rapt attention. Mon ami, the method was simple yet brilliant. Mrs. Carver laced Vane's tea with chloroform, a subtle dose to render him drowsy. She used the magnetized needle to manipulate the lock, entering and exiting without trace. The letter opener, wiped clean, left no fingerprints. The watch, stopped at 11:15 p.m., was a deliberate ruse to confuse the timeline. The cigarette stub and photograph were planted to implicate Harrow and suggest an affair, while the coded list misled us toward all suspects. But the smudge on the carpet, the pharma vial, and the diary, they betrayed her. Hastings shook his head, marveling. Poirot, you saw what none of us could. That needle, how did you know? Poirot's mustache twitched. The scratch near the keyhole, mon ami, was too precise for a common tool. Only a chemist like Mrs. Carver with access to her husband's tools could devise such a method. The little gray cells, they noticed what others overlook. The household began to disperse. Lady Beatrice and Clara retired to their rooms, their bond strengthened by shared grief and relief. Grayson, under Japp's watchful eye, promised to cooperate with inquiries into his forgery. Harrow, packing his bag, prepared to leave London, his rivalry with Vane now a bitter memory. The house, though scarred, felt cleansed, its oppressive air dissipating as the fog outside lifted. Poirot and Hastings stepped into the foyer where the grand staircase gleamed under the afternoon light. Japp joined them, his notebook tucked away. "A tidy case, Poirot," he said. "Mrs. Carver's confessed fully, says Vane drove her to it with his demands. She'll face the gallows." Poirot nodded, his expression somber. "Justice, Inspector, is served, but it is never joyful. Dr. Vane's greed destroyed him, and Mrs. Carver's desperation destroyed her." As they stepped outside, the cobblestones of Rue de Lune glistened with fading mist. Poirot adjusted his overcoat, his cane tapping a steady rhythm. "Mon ami," he said to Hastings, "the human heart is a complex thing. Vane's secrets, Carver's fear, Clara's loyalty, all are threads in the tapestry of this crime. But the truth, it shines through always." Hastings smiled. "You make it sound simple, Poirot." Poirot's eyes twinkled. "Simple? No. But to Hercule Poirot, it is inevitable." They boarded a hansom cab, the house receding into the fog. Poirot leaned back, sipping a tisane from his flask, his mind already turning to the next mystery. The case of Rue de Lune was closed, its locked room puzzle solved, its justice delivered. Yet Poirot knew London's shadows held countless more secrets, waiting for his little gray cells to unravel. And so, dear listeners, the mystery of Dr. Vane's murder is solved, the truth laid bare by the inimitable Hercule Poirot. Thank you for joining us on this journey through the fog of Rue de Lune. Share your thoughts in the comments. Where are you listening from? Until our next tale of intrigue, au revoir. Chapter 8. Shadows of Doubt. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the cobblestones of Rue de Lune. But within number 17, the air remained heavy with the echoes of Dr. Archibald Vane's murder. Hercule Poirot stood in the foyer, his patent leather shoes gleaming, his green eyes alert despite the resolution of the locked room mystery. Mrs. Evelyn Carver's confession and arrest had brought a semblance of closure, yet Poirot's little gray cells buzzed with unease, as if a final piece of the puzzle remained elusive. Captain Hastings, ever loyal, stood beside him while Inspector Japp coordinated the departure of his constables, their boots clattering in the marble hall. The remaining occupants, Lady Beatrice Vane, Clara Vane, Leonard Grayson, and Dr. Julian Harrow, lingered in the drawing room, their relief tempered by lingering tension. Poirot's mind retraced the case. The chloroform vial, the magnetized needle, the stopped watch at 11:15 p.m., the cryptic letter, the unburnt cigarette stub, the torn photograph, and Vane's diary had all pointed to Mrs. Carver. Her motive, blackmail over her addiction, had driven her to a meticulously planned murder, executed with chemical precision. Yet a faint discord nagged at Poirot, a detail that refused to align. He adjusted his overcoat, his cane tapping softly, and murmured to Hastings, "Mon ami, the truth is revealed, but sometimes the truth casts shadows of doubt." The household was restless. Lady Beatrice, her delicate frame still trembling, sat by the drawing-room window, her emerald ring catching the fading light. Clara, her auburn hair loose, paced nearby, her defiance now a protective shield for her mother. Grayson, his nervous energy subdued, stood by the fireplace, his cufflinks still but his eyes darting. Harrow, his arrogance chastened, smoked a cigarette, its Turkish scent mingling with the room's tension. Perkins, the butler, moved silently, offering tea no one drank. A new development disrupted the calm. Japp, returning from the police van, held a small leather-bound notebook, its pages yellowed. "Found this in Mrs. Carver's room during a final sweep," he said, handing it to Poirot. "It's coded, like that list you found, but it mentions Vane and someone else." Poirot's eyes gleamed as he opened it, recognizing a cipher similar to the one tucked in Vane's medical text. The entries, dated weeks prior, referenced A.V., Archibald Vane, and L.B., with sums of money and cryptic phrases like final payment and silence secured. Poirot's brow furrowed. L.B., Lady Beatrice, perhaps. This suggests a deeper connection. Poirot summoned Lady Beatrice for a private word in the library, his tone gentle but firm. "Madame, this notebook, it links you to Mrs. Carver. Did you know of her dealings with your husband?" Lady Beatrice's hands shook, her handkerchief twisting. I suspected Archibald was extorting her," she whispered. "He hinted at it, boasting of his control. I begged him to stop, but he laughed." Her voice broke, and Poirot noted a flicker of fear in her eyes, not just for her husband's cruelty, but for something unspoken. The bruise on her wrist, now fading, seemed more significant, a mark of coercion, perhaps. Clara, overhearing, burst in. "Mother, you don't have to protect him anymore." She turned to Poirot. "Father was blackmailing Mrs. Carver, yes, but he also threatened Mother with ruin if she spoke of his affairs. I found out days before. I wanted to confront him." Poirot's gaze softened. "Mademoiselle, your loyalty is clear, but did you act on this knowledge?" Clara shook her head fiercely. "No, I swear, I only wrote that note to throw you off Mother's trail." The notebook raised a troubling question. Had Mrs. Carver acted alone, or was there an accomplice? Poirot re-examined the coded list from Vane's study, CV, LG, EC, JH, noting that LB was absent. Was it an oversight, or had Mrs. Carver deliberately excluded Lady Beatrice to protect her? He returned to the study, the scene of the crime now eerily quiet. The desk, still stained with ink, held no new secrets, but Poirot rechecked the magnetized needle found in Mrs. Carver's room. Its precision suggested a solitary act, yet the notebook hinted at collaboration. A fresh clue emerged when Perkins, hesitant, approached Poirot. "Sir, I overheard something the night of the murder. Mrs. Carver and Mr. Grayson whispering in the drawing room before dinner. I couldn't catch much, but she mentioned settling accounts with Vane. Poirot's mustache twitched. Grayson's alibi tied to Mrs. Carver had held, but this suggested a deeper alliance. Poirot confronted Grayson in the drawing room, his voice sharp. Monsieur, you and Madame Carver discussed more than investments, What accounts needed settling? Grayson's face paled, his cufflinks clicking nervously. I owed Vane money, yes. Evelyn, Mrs. Carver, knew. She said she'd help, but I didn't know she meant murder. His panic seemed genuine, but Poirot pressed. And this notebook, it mentions payments. Were you part of her plan? Grayson shook his head. No, I thought she meant a loan. I was in the drawing room with her when Vane died. Poirot noted the chemist's desperation, wondering if it masked complicity. Harrow, observing from the sidelines, interjected. You're grasping, Poirot. Carver acted alone. Her kind always does. His tone was bitter, but Poirot caught a flicker of unease in his eyes. The unburnt cigarette stub meant to frame Harrow now seemed a clumsy distraction. Had Mrs. Carver planted it to shift suspicion, or had another hand placed it? Poirot re-examined the stub, noting a faint chemical residue, possibly from Grayson's lab, not Harrow's pocket. The torn photograph showing Vane with an unknown woman took on new significance. Poirot studied it under a magnifying glass, spotting a faint monogram on the woman's sleeve, E.C. Mrs. Carver, then, was likely the figure in the Paris café, her connection to Vane deeper than admitted. The diary's entries about her payments suggested a long-standing arrangement, perhaps romantic, turned sour by blackmail. But why include Lady Beatrice in the notebook? Poirot gathered the suspects again, his presence commanding silence. Mes amis, he said, the case is solved, yet shadows remain. This notebook suggests Madame Carver did not act alone. Madame Beatrice, your husband's cruelty implicated you, but you are innocent. Monsieur Grayson, your debts tied you to Mrs. Carver, but you did not strike the blow. Dr. Harrow, the cigarette was a false clue, but your resentment clouds your truth. Mademoiselle Clara, your confession protected your mother, not a murderer. He turned to the coded notebook. The entries link Madame Carver to payments, but LB suggests a connection to Madame Beatrice. I believe Mrs. Carver used your name, Madame, as a final misdirection to confuse any who found her records. She acted alone, her motive clear. Vane's blackmail threatened her ruin. The needle, the chloroform, the stopped watch, all were her work, executed with precision. Jap, listening, nodded. Carver's confession holds, Poirot. She admitted to the needle trick, the chloroform in the tea, everything. No mention of an accomplice. Poirot inclined his head. Oui, Inspector, but the notebook was her insurance, a way to implicate others if caught. She is clever, but not clever enough. The household exhaled. Lady Beatrice wept softly, Clara at her side. Grayson, relieved, vowed to cooperate with Jap's inquiry into his forgery. Harrow, his career tarnished, left silently, his cigarette unlit. Perkins resumed his duties, the house settling into a fragile peace. Poirot, satisfied, stepped into the foyer with Hastings. Mon ami, he said, the shadows of doubt are dispelled. The truth, it is singular, but human hearts are complex. As they left Rue de Lune, the fog now a faint mist, Poirot sipped his tisane, his mind at ease. The case was closed, the murderer caught and justice served. Yet the notebook's cipher lingered in his thoughts, a reminder that even solved mysteries leave echoes. The little gray cells, he told Hastings. They rest, but they are ever vigilant. Chapter 9. Echoes of Truth. The twilight of October 24, 1925, draped number 17 Rue de Lune in a somber hush, as if the house itself mourned the unraveling of its secrets. Hercule Poirot stood in the grand foyer, his polished cane tapping a slow rhythm on the marble floor, his green eyes reflecting a mind still probing the edges of the case. Mrs. Evelyn Carver's arrest had brought justice to the locked-room murder of Dr. Archibald Vane, her confession sealing her fate. The chloroform vial, the magnetized needle, the stopped watch at 11:15 p.m., the cryptic letter, the unburnt cigarette stub, and the torn photograph had all been explained. Yet Poirot's little gray cells hummed with the faint unease of unresolved threads. Captain Hastings, ever steadfast, stood beside him, while Inspector Japp finalized reports with his constables in the drawing room. The household, Lady Beatrice Vane, Clara Vane, Leonard Grayson, and Dr. Julian Harrow, gathered in uneasy quiet, their lives reshaped by the truth. Poirot's thoughts returned to the coded notebook found in Mrs. Carver's room, its entries mentioning A.V., Archibald Vane, and L.B., Lady Beatrice, alongside sums and cryptic phrases like final payment. The notebook had suggested a possible accomplice, but Mrs. Carver's confession claimed sole responsibility. Was it a final deception, or had Poirot overlooked a deeper truth? He adjusted his overcoat, murmuring to Hastings, "Mon ami, the case is closed, yet the echoes of truth whisper still. We must listen." The drawing room, bathed in the soft glow of gas lamps, held a fragile calm. Lady Beatrice sat by the window, her delicate hands folded, her emerald ring glinting as she stared into the fading fog. Clara, her auburn hair loosely pinned, hovered protectively, her defiance softened by concern. Grayson, his nervous energy spent, sat slump-shouldered, his cufflinks idle. Harrow, his arrogance dimmed, smoked a cigarette, its Turkish scent sharp in the air. Perkins the butler moved silently, his gaunt frame a shadow tending to the fire. A new discovery jolted Poirot's focus. Japp, returning from the study, held a small brass key, its surface etched with a faint V. "Found this tucked behind a picture frame," Japp said. "It doesn't fit the study door or safe. Any ideas, Poirot?" Poirot's eyes gleamed as he examined it, noting its delicate craftsmanship. "This key, Inspector, it is a clue to something hidden. Perhaps a final secret of Dr. Vane." He suspected it unlocked a private compartment, possibly tied to the notebook ciphers. Poirot requested a private audience with Lady Beatrice in the library, his tone gentle but probing. "Madame, the notebook mentions L.B. in payments. Did you pay Mrs. Carver, or was your name used to mislead?" Lady Beatrice's eyes widened, her handkerchief twisting. "I never paid her," she whispered. "Archibald controlled our finances, but I knew he was blackmailing her. He taunted me with it, saying my silence ensured our comfort." Her voice trembled, and Poirot noted the bruise on her wrist, now barely visible. "And this mark, madam?" he asked. She flushed, admitting, "He grabbed me during an argument days before. I said nothing to protect Clara." Clara, entering unbidden, overheard. "Mother, you should have told me," she cried. Turning to Poirot, she added, "Father was vile, but I didn't know about Mrs. Carver until I overheard their argument. I thought Mother might be blamed." Poirot nodded, his suspicions shifting. Lady Beatrice's fear had been genuine, but her role seemed limited to a victim of Vane's cruelty, not an accomplice. Poirot turned his attention to the brass key, exploring the study once more. Behind a heavy medical tome, he found a locked box, its slot matching the key's design. Inside was a ledger separate from Vane's diary, detailing payments from Mrs. Carver and another name. J.H. Julian Harrow. The sums were smaller, but the dates aligned with Harrow's professional disputes with Vane. Poirot's mustache twitched. Dr. Harrow, he too was ensnared by Vane's blackmail. This complicates the motive. Confronting Harrow in the drawing room, Poirot held up the ledger. Doctor, you paid Dr. Vane to keep silent about your falsified research, we? Harrow's cigarette trembled, his smirk gone. He had proof I fudged a study years ago, he admitted. I paid to save my career, but I didn't kill him. That cigarette stub wasn't mine, it was planted. Poirot nodded, the unburnt stub's chemical residue now a clearer misdirection. You are innocent of murder, but not of deceit, he said, his tone firm. Grayson, overhearing, grew agitated. What about me? You know I owed Vane, but I didn't help Carver. Poirot's gaze was piercing. Monsieur Grayson, your forgery is a crime, but your alibi holds. Yet your whispered talk with Madame Carver, settling accounts, suggests you knew more than you claim. Grayson paled. She only hinted at dealing with Vane. I thought she meant financially. Poirot noted his panic, suspecting Grayson's ignorance was genuine, but his desperation had made him vulnerable to manipulation. The notebook's reference to L.B. puzzled Poirot most. He hypothesized Mrs. Carver had added Lady Beatrice's initials to cast suspicion, a safeguard if her plan failed. To test this, he re-examined the torn photograph, its Parisian cafe setting and EC monogram confirming Mrs. Carver's presence with Vane in 1922. A faint note on the back, previously overlooked, read, "For silence, 5,000. This linked directly to the notebook's entries, solidifying her motive but suggesting no other conspirators. Poirot gathered the household once more, his voice commanding. Mes amis, the echoes of this crime reach beyond Madame Carver's confession. This ledger reveals Dr. Vane's web of blackmail, ensnaring Dr. Harrow and Madame Carver, but not Madame Beatrice. Her name in the notebook was a deception, a final trick by a desperate killer. The brass key unlocked Vane's secrets, but the murder, it was hers alone. Lady Beatrice wept softly, relieved. Clara embraced her, her ambition now unburdened by her father's shadow. Grayson, chastened, vowed to face his financial crimes, while Harrow, his career in tatters, nodded grimly, accepting his exposure. Perkins, ever dutiful, offered tea, his hands steady for the first time. Poirot returned to the study, the scene of the crime now a silent witness to justice. He reviewed the clues, the chloroform vial, linked to Mrs. Carver's pharmacy connections, the magnetized needle, her ingenious tool, the stopped watch, a deliberate misdirection, the cryptic letter, an unburnt cigarette, false trails to confuse. The ledger and notebook confirmed Vane's blackmail, but Mrs. Carver's solitary act, driven by fear of social ruin, closed the case. Japp, joining Poirot, confirmed Mrs. Carver's full confession. She admitted planting the cigarette and photograph to frame Harrow, he said. Says she acted alone, used the notebook to muddy the waters. Poirot nodded. Oui, Inspector. Her cunning was her downfall. The little gray cells, they see through such shadows. As night fell, Poirot and Hastings prepared to leave. The house, though scarred, felt lighter, its secrets exposed. Poirot, Hastings said, you tied up every loose end. That notebook nearly threw us. Poirot smiled. Mon ami, the truth is like a melody, complex but harmonious when understood. Madame Carver played a dangerous tune, but Hercule Poirot heard the true notes. They stepped into the street, the fog now a faint veil. Poirot's cane tapped steadily, his mind at ease. The echoes of truth had been silenced, the case fully resolved. Yet, as always, he knew London's shadows held more mysteries waiting for his unparalleled deduction. Chapter 10. The Final Reckoning. The evening of October 24th, 1925, settled over number 17 Rue de Lune, with a quiet that felt almost sacred, as if the house itself sighed in relief. The fog that had cloaked London for days had lifted, revealing a sky pricked with stars, their light filtering through the tall windows of the grand townhouse. Hercule Poirot stood in the foyer, his patent leather shoes gleaming, his green eyes serene yet vigilant. The locked room murder of Dr. Archibald Vane had been solved. Mrs. Evelyn Carver, driven by fear of blackmail, had confessed to her cunning crime. Her magnetized needle and chloroform vial now evidence for Scotland Yard. Yet Poirot's little gray cells lingered on the case, ensuring no detail remained unresolved. Captain Hastings, his loyal friend, stood beside him while Inspector Japp finalized his reports in the drawing room, his gruff voice a steady hum. The household, Lady Beatrice Vane, Clara Vane, Leonard Grayson, and Dr. Julian Harrow, gathered one last time, their faces a mix of relief, grief, and tentative hope. Poirot adjusted his overcoat, his cane tapping softly on the marble floor. "Mon ami," he said to Hastings, "the case is closed, the murderer caught, yet the human heart, it seeks closure beyond justice. We must ensure the truth leaves no scars unhealed." Hastings nodded, his earnest face reflecting admiration. "You've done it again, Poirot. That notebook, the key. It nearly threw us, but you saw through it all." The drawing room, bathed in the soft glow of gas lamps, was a scene of quiet reconciliation. Lady Beatrice sat on the velvet settee, her delicate hands no longer trembling, her emerald ring catching the light as she clasped Clara's hand. Clara, her auburn hair neatly pinned, exuded a renewed determination, her eyes bright with purpose. Grayson, his nervous energy replaced by a subdued resolve, stood by the fireplace, his cufflinks still but his posture straighter. Harrow, his arrogance humbled, smoked a final cigarette, its Turkish scent faint. Perkins, the butler, moved with newfound steadiness, offering tea that for once was accepted. Poirot's thoughts returned to the final clues, the coded notebook mentioning L.B., Lady Beatrice, the brass key unlocking Vane's hidden ledger, and the torn photograph linking Mrs. Carver to Vane in Paris. These had suggested a deeper conspiracy, but Mrs. Carver's confession, corroborated by the magnetized needle, the chloroform vials pharma logo, and the diary, confirmed her solitary act. The notebook's reference to Lady Beatrice was a deliberate misdirection, a safeguard to implicate others if Mrs. Carver was caught. The ledger detailing payments from Harrow and Mrs. Carver exposed Vane's blackmail but cleared the others of murder. To ensure no loose ends remained, Poirot requested a final audience with the household. He stood before them, his voice warm yet authoritative. "Mes amis, the murder of Dr. Vane was a crime of desperation born of his greed and cruelty. Madame Carver, with her chemical expertise, devised a plan most ingenious. Chloroform in his tea, a magnetized needle to manipulate the lock, a stopped watch to mislead the timeline. The letter, the cigarette stub, the photograph, these were her distractions, but the smudge on the carpet, the vial, and the diary betrayed her." Lady Beatrice's eyes glistened. "Monsieur Poirot, you've given us peace. Archibald's actions, they hurt us all, but we're free now." Poirot inclined his head. "Madame, your strength endured his cruelty. The bruise on your wrist, it was a mark of his control, not your guilt." Clara, her voice steady, added, "I can pursue my studies now without his shadow. Thank you." Poirot smiled faintly. "Mademoiselle, your ambition will light your path. Use it wisely." Grayson stepped forward, his round face earnest. "I've been a fool, Poirot, forging documents, dodging debts. But I'll face the consequences and rebuild." Poirot nodded. "Monsieur, honesty is your redemption. The ledger exposed your weakness, but you did not kill." Grayson exhaled, a weight lifting from his shoulders. Harrow, his cigarette extinguished, met Poirot's gaze. "Vane ruined me, but you cleared my name of murder. I'll salvage what I can." Poirot's tone was firm but kind. "Doctor, your rivalry was your folly, but the cigarette stub was not yours. Build anew, with truth." Harrow nodded, his pride tempered by humility. Perkins, hovering at the edges, spoke softly. Sir, the house feels alive again. Your work has saved us. Poirot's eyes twinkled. Monsieur Perkins, your loyalty sustained this household. Continue, and all will be well. Jap, joining them, clapped Poirot's shoulder. Carver's at the station, singing like a canary. Admits to everything, the needle, the chloroform, even planting the notebook to throw us off. You nailed it, Poirot. Poirot's mustache twitched. Inspector, the little gray cells, they do not fail. The truth, it is in the details. Poirot took a final walk through the study, the scene of the crime now a quiet testament to his triumph. The desk, its ink stain faded, held no more secrets. The chloroform vial, the magnetized needle, the stopped watch, the cryptic letter, the unburnt cigarette stub, the torn photograph, the coded list, the diary, the ledger, the brass key. All had played their part. The secret passage, though intriguing, was a relic, irrelevant to the murder. Clara's false confession and Grayson's attempted flight were acts of desperation, not guilt. Mrs. Carver's solitary crime, driven by Vane's blackmail over her addiction, was the heart of the mystery. He reflected on the method. Mrs. Carver's subtle dose of chloroform in Vane's tea, her use of the needle to unlock and relock the door, her deliberate smashing of the watch to suggest an earlier death. The letter, cigarette, and photograph were red herrings, crafted to implicate Harrow and suggest an affair. The notebook and ledger, meant to confuse, instead confirmed her motive. The smudge on the carpet matching her shoe was the final clue that sealed her fate. Poirot shared his thoughts with Hastings as they prepared to leave. Mon ami, the murderer thought to outwit us with complexity, but simplicity is the truth's ally. The needle, the vial, the smudge. These were her errors, unnoticed by her but clear to Hercule Poirot. Hastings grinned. You make it sound easy, Poirot, but only you could see it. Poirot's eyes sparkled. Not easy, but inevitable. The household gathered in the foyer to bid Poirot farewell. Lady Beatrice, her composure restored, offered a tremulous smile. Monsieur Poirot, you've given us a future, Clara added. I'll study medicine in his memory and defiance. Grayson, subdued, promised, no more deceit. Harrow, already turning to leave, gave a curt nod, his path uncertain but his innocence affirmed. Poirot and Hastings stepped into the street, the cobblestones gleaming under the starlight. A hansom cab waited, its horse snorting softly. Poirot sipped his tisane, his mind at peace. The human heart, he told Hastings, it weaves a tangled web, greed, fear, loyalty, ambition. But the truth, it shines through always. Hastings nodded. Another triumph, Poirot. Where to next? Poirot smiled. To Whitehaven Mansions, mon ami, and perhaps another mystery. London never sleeps. As the cab rolled away, Rue de Lune faded into the night, its secrets laid bare. The case was closed, justice served, and the household freed from Vane's shadow. Poirot's little gray cells rested ready for the next challenge in the city's endless tapestry of intrigue.